This episode is sponsored by Horizon Capital, an M&A and micro private equity firm that acquires and grows SaaS companies. Horizon Capital only works with SaaS companies generating between $500K and $5 million in annual recurring revenue, where they help them unlock the true value of their business and scale to the next level. Whether you're ready to move on to your next startup or want to work with the right growth partner, Horizon's team will work with you to find the best structure possible. From M&A strategy to capital investments, SaaS is all they do. Simple as that. If you're a SaaS founder with less than $5 million in annual recurring revenue and are looking to sell your business, visit horizoncapital.com today and get a free valuation. If you'd like to sponsor the SaaS District podcast or recommend any guest that you think would be valuable to be on the show, visit horizoncapital.com/SaaS-podcast today. Thanks again, folks. Hello, everyone. This is your host, Akil Jabbar, and welcome back to another episode of SaaS District. In today's episode, we'll be talking about how to reduce and manage your SaaS data security risk and privacy compliance. Today, we have our guest, Darren Gallop, joining us. Darren is a business leader and security professional with over 20 years of experience as a CEO and CISO of companies that handle sensitive data and is based out of Nova Scotia, Canada. Having founded a nonprofit organization, 3 service companies, and 2 tech startups in his career, he understands how to assess and manage risk in alignment with organizational goals. Darren is also a tech entrepreneur, information security expert, Techstars alumni, board member, and the CEO of Security. He co-founded Security and led the team to develop a SaaS product that guides businesses through creating, implementing, and manage their information security and privacy compliance program. Darren previously co-founded Marcato and was the CEO there for 10 years until the company was acquired by Patron Technologies. So Darren most of the time spends most of his non-work time playing music, fly fishing, canoeing, gardening, and roasting coffee. So welcome, Darren. Glad to have you on SaaS District today.
Hey, glad to be here.
Awesome. So I just want to start directly with your background, and let's get into some failures. So I want to hear about the story, which you mentioned was around how at a previous SaaS company you started, you lost a 6-figure deal after the company that couldn't prove a strong security posture. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. I don't forget that one easily.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what happened was, we were a small SaaS company. We were selling a festival management platform, and we were mostly originally selling to very small festivals, regional festivals around Canada and whatnot. And then, all of a sudden we just started to hit this sort of streak of big festivals. We signed some big ones like Coachella and Bonnaroo and stuff like that. And along with that, it just really quickly had these larger corporate organizations coming in that own festivals like AEG, Live Nation, Disney, and organizations of this sort. And in that, in the second round of all of that exciting business coming our way, we had a really big vendor in Europe that would have brought in something around 16 or 17 major festivals. They sent a security questionnaire to us. It was very detailed. They were obviously very concerned and just wanted to make sure that all of the data they were collecting was what was being well looked after. And we just really, a very tight time cycle in terms of selling a festival, because the festival has a very short window between the festival ending and starting to plan the next festival. And we just weren't able to get ready in time. It's one thing to answer the questions, but to actually do the things that you're saying that you're doing in these documents can be quite a bit of work. It can be pretty daunting, and it really touches every aspect of your business. So we did everything we could. We made progress over the window of opportunity we had there, but we eventually, in the end, lost the deal. We continued to work on it over the festival season, over the summer, and got ourselves in tip-top shape for the next sort of sales cycle. But by then, the organization had moved on and found another solution to their problem. So our window of opportunity essentially closed. We never got that back. So that one hurt.
Ouch. Yeah. You always have that story, right? That something, but at least you learned from it, and that was led to other opportunities, right?
I would have rather have learned it from maybe like a $10,000 deal, but
that's true. That's true. I agree. Cool. And then what was the opportunity you saw? What was the problem that motivated you that you saw in the market so clearly to start your company Security where you run today?
Yeah. So, after we got through that challenge and we finally built a security program, it took a lot of energy. We spent a lot of money in consultants. We read a lot of different stuff. It was challenging because a lot of traditional security thought and a lot of security content out there was, especially at that time back in 2013, 2014, was really focused on the enterprise environment. So we had to do a lot of work to try to really understand what controls made sense in our business. A lot of traditional things like worrying about the local network and stuff like that, where we're heavily work from home and stuff like that. There was just very different beast. And so we did a lot of thinking. We came up with some interesting ways to secure the company. We realized as we started, working with larger festivals and getting more security questionnaires, that this wasn't a one-off thing. This was really the future. And at that point, there was a lot of rumblings about the inevitable GDPR, which was coming down the pipeline, and rumors of other privacy regulations around the world. And that just led us to think, this is a really good position for us to take to be the secure option in the space. We had some young up and coming companies coming after us, and they didn't have a security posture that they could brag about. So we really decided to go overboard with it, really vamp our security up. We had a certified audit on the company. So we had a SOC 2 audit done for us. And I went on to study cybersecurity after hours and weekends, did my CISSP, which is a certification. You write a really long exam about just about everything to do with cybersecurity. It was a really challenging endeavor, but got that. It was funny when I posted that on my LinkedIn, I had a whole bunch of my friends that were also startup founders for other event tech companies hit me up on message and being like, can you help us? We're getting all these questionnaires. So it was really clear to me that we had figured out as a startup how to present ourselves in a way that demonstrated assurance, that made that showed that our risk was low and that we really took looking after customer data seriously. It was obvious to me that this was something other people were struggling with, and being a person who likes big, complex problems like the problem we solved in the festival space around logistics, I saw this as somewhat of a logistical or an information-based problem. So, I just started getting obsessed with the idea, and it was, on the back burner. And as I started moving towards selling Marcato, I was really at that point already starting to draft this up and had a few people recruited on the side and was sort of quietly strumming up the security mission. It was just I guess it's the classic thing. You encounter and feel the problems that you have in your own work and life. And I think that's why so many entrepreneurs basically they build businesses from those problems, because they have that unique experience of living those problems.
Exactly. It's from your actual experience. So you sell Marcato, you're in that process, and then, or, you did exit. And then from there, you start, drumming up this idea, you're learning about it, you're, putting together, data, putting together, your training and learning. And then you also start building out your team. At what point did you guys decide, and what was the process of building like an actual SaaS, from idea to actual launch? Did you have that experience as a tech founder, or did you have a tech co-founder with you? And what were some initial costs to get it off the ground?
Yeah, so both my founder and I, my co-founder and I, neither of us are tech founders per se. I guess I have the technology expertise around the cyberspace, but in terms of a CTO or an engineer, we actually started it with hiring a UX designer, because we believe that the opportunity was to create something new and slick and very user friendly, which was at the time certainly something we felt was lacking in the security space. And we brought in a consultant who had done some work in Marcato. And so it's kind of funny because the UX guy, our first employee, was a a previous Marcato UX employee, and my co-founder was the head of sales at Marcato. And then the consultant we brought in to start building the technology was doing this as sort of a part-time project initially. And he was also somebody who came to me as a consultant who helped us with some technical architecture issues at Marcato in the past. So that was really sort of the initial team. And then we just started adding developers in. But I would say, like, for us, we were developing software before we entirely knew what we were building. We knew certain things. So we knew that security needed policies, and we knew that in order for people to read policies and sign off on policies, we needed login credentials. And we were just really building like the platform, the skeleton of a very generic tool initially. And then in the meantime, we had built some data collection pieces that were, I think, originally built in HubSpot, actually. So my co-founder and I were building this stuff out, and essentially what we were doing is sort of Wizard of Ozing one of the modules of the tool. So we had this idea that, hey, you answer 30 or 40 questions, and from that, we'll be able to build a set of security policies for your organization. And so it looked like we had a magical tool in the background that was doing that. But really what was happening is you'd fill out all the questions, and then we'd get an alert. And then we had like a document in Google Docs with like all these variables. And we had like, if they answered, this question this way, it meant this. And we would just go with Wizard of Oz it. And, we had this disclosure like, hey, because this is a beta technology, you'll get your policies in 24 hours. And we use that as an experience to really sort of figure out, could we build a good policy builder where you would feel like you actually had a set of policies built that were unique to your business, that weren't just like a template with your name and address filled in. And that was a really interesting experiment. And then we just started really building from that. Initially, I think we did like a really small family and friends round. It was about $150,000 that gave us the ability to pay wages for a couple of months to just sort of like test the idea. One of the interesting things that we did in the testing process is we charged money for it. So we wanted to prove that that people would pay and figure out how much they'd pay. And we did all kinds of experiments where we'd start off at a really small sum and then just keep driving it up until people were like, whoa, this is expensive. That gave us a lot of insight in terms of what we were going to build. And then it really sort of went from the policies. So in 2018, we went out and we raised, again, another small round. We raised about $500,000, again, just to keep the lights on, keep working on it and figuring it out. And then in 2019, when we launched, we went out and raised about $1.5 million, and that gave us a team to actually really start diving in and building the product. And we did, like, I think what most startups do is you launch a product when it's kind of not really quite where you want it, but you got to get it out there and you got to start proving it in market, and you got to start getting real customers that aren't like your friends or your mom or somebody like that will give you legit feedback without any candy coating. So.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's kind of a common issue, right? That people face is they take too long and they're waiting for everything to be perfect, but we need to get that feedback as soon as possible. So for those who are in our audience, or maybe early stages, or they don't clearly understand this space, can you explain what SaaS data security is, the risk and compliances are? Why is it important? Why should SaaS founders make sure that they get that right?
Yeah. So to define what, whether you call it data security or cybersecurity or information security, these are all terms that are thrown around. Now we have data privacy in there, which generally refers to privacy regulations. Essentially, the information security is basically anything that protects confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information. So inherently, I think every startup, every CTO, every technical founder or developer has some sense of it to a degree. So, you obviously know that you want to have backups, because if something bad happens, you want to make sure that you still have availability, you still have your customers' data, and you're generally doing things to ensure uptime. I mean, it's obviously not a good look when your web app goes down for a day, especially if it's a critical service. Right. But really, unfortunately, a lot of startups, you're generally thinking about figuring out what are you building, trying to build it quick. It's never quick enough. Everything takes like way more time and money every time. I've never seen people say, hey, we're going to build this thing in 2 weeks, or we're going to build this feature in a month and do it. It's very rare that it happens on time. So you run into snags, you got a lot of pressure. Obviously as a startup, you're always working against the clock. So you're spending money trying to get your product to a point where you can validate it and have customers pay for it, either to generate money so you can pay your bills and your wages, or to raise that next round of capital. So unfortunately, because of that pressure and all those other, big projects that are looming on sort of your business succeeding or not, cybersecurity or data security generally doesn't have any formal sort of articulation. And the problem that creates is you end up writing more and more code. So if there's any bad practices that you have, or if you architect things without thinking of all the elements of security, the problem that happens when you're, say, at $2 million in ARR and you're like, okay, well, we need to pass an audit or we need to do this thing, is that you have all this technical debt you may not have even had really had an inventory of. So you have all of this sort of accumulative code and architectural decisions and product design decisions that could negatively affect you. And so, I think traditionally, there wasn't a whole lot of pressure on startups. Like when I think about launching my first SaaS in 2010, very rarely you got really weird questions like, what's the cloud? Or like, what's this? People would say things like, what is security like, without really knowing what they're talking about. That has changed so much. Like if you're selling now to upper mid-market or to enterprise right now, like it doesn't matter if you're a 2-person SaaS or a 100-person SaaS, you are not going to be able to sell a product that touches any customer data of any level of confidentiality, like even simple things like names and phone numbers of their employees or addresses or stuff like that. I mean, you're just not going to be, they're going to want to go put you through a process, a third-party risk and due diligence process, where they're going to ask you a lot of really pointed questions. And I go through this with my customers all the time. Honestly, most of our customers come to us too late. They come to us when they're just at the verge of potentially losing that big deal that I've experienced. And they've waited too long. They have that buildup of technical debt. So it's not like you can just flick a couple of switches and automatically have your company secure. And just to be more clear, there's in most startups, there's a couple of key components. Like obviously your SaaS is predominantly your largest and most valuable asset. That's usually where most of your customer data resides. So that is a big piece, obviously, of any security or compliance exercise. But you also have requirements like background checking of employees. You need to make sure that the laptops are secure, that there's some sort of endpoint protection. You need to make sure there's training and awareness, and there's written documents, and there's a process, and there's very clear articulation of the importance of security in the organization. So, it does take some work, but the sooner you do it, the earlier in your business you do it, the less work it is. If it's something that's thought of from day one and is just incorporated, even not as a predominant thing, but just as a thing. So you have you have a couple of lunch and learns, you focus on secure development practices, and you're thinking about security by design in your application, and just sort of developing those good practices right from the beginning. Then when you have that big proof of concept with your ideal customer, you're going to look sophisticated and responsible. You're not going to be caught in that. Like I see so many founders being caught not even understanding half of the questions that the vendor's asking them around their data security.
Sure. So you mentioned most of them will come to you probably at a point where it might be just a little bit too late than you'd like, or just makes it a lot more complicated at that point. At what point do you suggest that a SaaS company or founder really start thinking about that cybersecurity and data privacy? Is that from still day one, or once you have that client?
Absolutely, I think it makes sense to do it at day one. If you are doing it because when the customer's on the door, you're in a bad spot. And I think about it, like you've got this communication going on where you're back and forth, your sales team, everything's quick, you're being responsive, you're doing all the best stuff. Then they send you a security questionnaire, and now it takes you 2 weeks to respond. Like it's very clear to that auditor that your delay in responding is an indication of the fact that you're looking at this going, oh.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
So you don't want to wait until you have to do it. Believe me that you will have to do it. And I think when we started working in the cyberspace or looking at it, it was mostly like health tech, fintech areas where there's a higher degree of critical or very protected information, confidential information. Now it's really anything, and all these privacy laws like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation in Europe, CCPA in California, PIPEDA in Canada, and there's others coming down the pipeline as well. They're all influencing that as well. And they're forcing large organizations to reevaluate their entire data program. And of course, to look at they have to look at their vendors, because if they're using a SaaS vendor, they need to make sure that vendor is not taking them out of compliance or not introducing new risks to their.
Right. What are some typical breaches that you see, from common around SaaS companies? Just what are you seeing there?
So there's always the case that the lower profile you are, which generally as an early stage company, you're much more low profile. Generally, when you're very low profile, there's less targeted hits towards your organization. As you start increasing your profile, as you market yourself and your brand, while you're marketing that to your customers, you're also marketing that to hackers. So as you start being noisier, there's more likelihood that you're going to have more sophisticated or more targeted attacks. Or if you start selling or landing deals with very reputable and noisy customers. So in our case at Marcato, we had Coachella logos and Burning Man logos on our website. So, if you were really trying to take down Coachella, you would look at who are their vendors, right? So that really, points to your company in that regard. But the most common things that we see in early stage companies, basically generic attacks where people are just circling around looking for vulnerabilities in websites using a bot of some sort. They find that your website or your server is using an old version of TLS or something like that that there's an attack vector they can take advantage of to gain access, or they do input validation testing and your tool fails or your web app fails. That they go and they do some sort of hack where maybe they get the whole database. And a lot of times, most of the time, startups don't know when this happens, because what will happen is it gets released in the dark web down the road, and it's usually in a combination of multiple hacks. So they may hack like 1,000 companies or 100 companies, and then pull that together as a big data set, and then sell that data set in the dark web. So it's not like you're going to find it because somebody's like, "Hey, Security's data is for sale in the dark web." It'll be some random name by some random hacker that's available. And if you don't have the monitoring tools, you're not doing any sort of threat monitoring or dark web monitoring, you may never find out that you've been hacked. So I would take a guess that there's a lot of companies out there that have been hacked that don't know it. And then the other ones, the ones that we see people feel the most as early stage, denial of service, so dedicated denial of service, DDoS attacks happen often enough. There are tools out there that you can put in place that reduce the likelihood of that. But to be totally honest, the thing I see the most often is internal error is the largest compromise and largest known compromise that I see in SaaS companies. So that is lack of proper code testing or quality of service before code is shipped to master. And so you have a developer who's really tired, pumping out a deadline at the end of the day for a customer, and they push a piece of code, and then they out the door, they head out for beer, and then all of a sudden phones start going off because now CPU is crashing or overloading because there was some random piece of code that, because there wasn't proper testing in play, or they were cutting corners in that regard. Now this thing's taken the web app down, so you're doing your own denial of service internally by a developer, overtired developer error. Or another one that I've seen is cases where the proper checks and balances aren't being had, and there's not enough sort of test-driven code in your code base, and somebody deploys something that actually allows for privilege escalation. So maybe somebody who's not supposed to have access to financial information in your organization and your CRM now has access to that. Right. Or a customer is able to see something they're not supposed to see. So we see a lot of that, and that can be very embarrassing and problematic, and even cause legal outcomes. But we end up investigating a lot of scenarios with SaaS companies, especially young SaaS companies that don't have those practices in place.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy. I never thought of that. Like people, stealing your database and then selling it on the dark web, and as you wouldn't find out, and then until you see maybe a copycat show up with the exact same code. That would be crazy. But
again, I think the most important thing is that whether you think you are susceptible to being hacked or not, it's still is. If you think you're not going to be hacked and you think you're secure enough, but you still don't have a formal security program, that's not going to be enough to satisfy most customers nowadays. So if you're not concerned about your low profile and the chance of being hacked per se, you should certainly be concerned about how problematic it's going to be in your sales process very early on.
Got it. So if I'm a SaaS founder, this is maybe something I haven't thought about, or I'm early stage. Either I am in day one, or I'm a little bit more advanced. But now I really want to start, considering this and start implementing. How do you recommend they start, building, framing, and documenting that comprehensive, centralized strategy for achieving, data privacy compliance for their clients?
Yeah, and so data privacy is being the piece where is the legal component where you're essentially protecting data in compliance with privacy regulations. That's a thing that you can talk to your legal counsel about, making sure you understand what compliance requirements you have before you start taking on large amounts of data, especially when you get into personally identifiable information or health information or stuff like that. I think, at the bare minimum, the thing that I would recommend startup founders to do is to start prioritizing security from day one in their product team. I would introduce the product team to the Open Web Application Security Project, OWASP.org. And there's what's called the OWASP Top 10. It's a great resource. It's totally free. They can go and they can download guides. They can read about that. They can start putting lunch and learns together. I would make clear that developing code, you generally say, well, hey, I want stuff on time. I want it to be fast. I want it to look good. Add in, you want it to be secure. And the reason I say that is because, it's very quick and easy for a small SaaS company to deploy endpoint protection or to put certain policies in effect in their organization, but architecting an app and designing a whole entire product and putting all those resources into it and not thinking about it securely is a massive oversight. And like I say, that does create a lot of technical debt. And in most cases, when we have software companies that are coming to us with their hair on fire because they have a big deal on the doorstep and they're trying to answer the security questionnaire in 5 days, the areas where we end up getting caught up and we end up losing time and losing ground are often on the application side. So, you could deploy endpoint protection on all your endpoints tomorrow. You can send around a hardening image or a policy for hardening laptops very quickly, but you can't pass a pen test necessarily very quickly if you have been building code without security as a thought in that whole process. So some lunch and learns, making it clear that it's important, and get some vulnerability scanning and out there, like make sure you're scanning the app and thinking about having a pen test before you go to market. Those would be some things I would definitely consider doing right out of the gate. Even just those conversations. We're always talking about things that are important. If security is not something we talk about as important, then it's just not going to happen.
Makes sense. You just have to make it a priority. Do you ever have companies, pointing the finger at you or your tool for the reason for problems or those breach after the fact, rather than having that plan?
I haven't, but I think we're pretty transparent on the limitations of what a tool or what advice can do, and so
true.
We're giving context around ways you can operate more in a more safe way. It doesn't eliminate entirely that there could be an accident or a misstep for sure. I kind of make it's kind of similar to driving, right? If you don't change your tires and you don't wear seatbelts and you don't follow the rules of the road and don't get your car inspected, you're certainly more likely to get in a car accident than if you follow the rules. So, but you still can get in a car accident if you follow the rules. So I've never had a scenario. I've never had a case of that happening. security, everything you do increases like every security control you deploy in your organization is going to help prevent certain attack vectors. But there's no like silver bullet per se.
Got it. So if a company, they do have some kind of security breach, right? They end up usually, losing that trust of whether it's their customers or the market. What is some things and some best practices or things they can do to help you regain that trust of that customer in the market and try to win them back?
Yeah. Unfortunately, for a lot of companies that have a breach, that moment of having that breach is the moment where they actually, really start taking security very, very seriously. Right. I think the worst case scenario, and we see it all the time, is cases where people try to cover it up or hide about it, or they're not being transparent or honest about it. That's the worst case scenario, and it happens a lot. I recently got an email from a vendor saying, we're changing our security practices. We ask you kindly to change, we recommend you change your password. Now, I found out earlier that day using a dark web monitoring tool that their entire user base was available on the dark web for sale for a couple of, fraction of a Bitcoin type of thing. And so, not being transparent about that. And then all of a sudden you get written up in a big cyber article about not being transparent. So that's when you really lose a lot of trust. I think you need to you need to be honest and say, what's the scenario? What happened? Be honest with your customers. And then I think if you haven't already put a solid security program together and a really good security page on your website, then that's a really great opportunity to up your game substantially. People will forget about the breach over time, generally. I mean, obviously it does depend on how bad it was, but, yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, but the best thing to do is to be honest and afterward to really articulate, improve and articulate your security improvements.
So if I'm trying to model a good strategy, right, a good kind of process and program in place, what does that look like from data protection for customers and employees? And then do you have any tips or tools that people can start, using and implementing today to improve their process, whether that's personally or for their business?
Yeah, and I mentioned the OWASP project. I think that's a great tool for any developer in any organization of any size, just to start becoming more aware of secure development practices. I think having your dev team make sure your product team is building a secure product is definitely very important for SaaS companies, in my opinion. I think it's also really critical that the leader, like the CEO, the founders of the company, lead by example. If you don't practice good hygiene from a security perspective, or you don't demonstrate that you care about security, then that means the company doesn't care, and that's how everybody else will be. So a little bit of awareness around that on the leadership side. It doesn't hurt to have some simple policies in place early. They're very easy to construct. We built a tool specifically for SaaS companies. So, I mean, we have a free tool as well that you can go on there and you can use that to start building your first couple of security policies around your business. So you can go to securacy.app and sign up for a free account and use that. I mean, having some documentation and just be leading it with clarity and by example, and making sure your product is thinking about it is a great start. Now, when you're starting to get ready to pitch to customers or get ready to do a POC, proof of concept, or bring on real customers, you're going to, at that point, you're going to need to look at having something more formal. In that case, you're going to need a full set of policies around your HR practices, around endpoints and how they're managed, around passwords and credentialing and secure development and testing and all that kind of stuff. So at that point, you're going to want to start thinking about benchmarking against a security framework or a security standard. There's a lot of them out there. The right one kind of depends on your industry and who you're selling to. There's things like ISO 27001. There's the Center for Internet Security, CIS security controls. There's U.S. government NIST controls, 800-171, CMMC. There's a whole bunch of them. And depending on the industry you're in, it does make sense to figure out what are the compliance, what compliance benchmarks are they benchmarking against? What are they looking for in their customers? So that's a really important piece of research when you're thinking about researching in your sales process, who you're selling to, also understanding what those security and privacy requirements are going to look like. I mean, you might be a US company selling to a US company and think that GDPR is not something of concern. But if that US company has, 20% of its users are in Europe or European citizens, then they're going to be having language in their contract or in their security due diligence around your GDPR compliance. And they're going to want to make sure that by storing data in your platform, that they're not jeopardizing their own compliance. So doing that research before you go to market, and then making sure that you talk to somebody who understands security compliance and can prepare you. You say you don't want to be in that situation where you've done all this hard work and now you're standing in front of a really nice, sweet deal with an ideal customer, and they're asking you for your ISO 27001 compliance, and you're sitting there going, what is ISO 27001? There's a lot of controls in a security framework like that. Most security frameworks are anywhere between 100 and 260 some controls. You need to validate your non-applicability. You need to comply, or if you say no to any of those, you have to have a really good reason not to. Not just, you can't use things like, "Oh, we're just a startup." Like, they don't care about that. And So yeah, that's the way I'd go about it. Start with sort of culture leadership, a little bit of basic foundational policy from day one. Really focus on making sure your developers are thinking about incorporating security into what they do and what they read and what they spend their lunch and learns on, and that helps you start a little bit of a security culture, and certainly like an aware group of people, and reduces the likelihood of having a bunch of technical debt. And then when you're really getting ready to talk to customers, which I think, for most SaaS companies nowadays is earlier than ever before. You want to be talking to customers. So in that research, make sure you know what they're going to expect and that you're planning that into your budget. And because otherwise you're going to be projecting a sale to close and it won't, because you're not ready from the security or privacy side to service that customer.
Got it. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Cool. So Darren, these are just a couple of questions to wrap up. More, for yourself, more curious. What are some biggest challenges you're currently facing and looking to overcome in continuing to grow security?
Yeah, I think like right now we're sort of entering into a growth mode. We've really nailed product market fit over the last within the last, say, 8 or 9 months. I feel like we've really figured that out, and we've started hiring, growing the team, bringing on dedicated sales and marketing resources. So now it's really going to be about recruiting, building a team. This company is now entirely remote. We're predominantly in Nova Scotia, but we do have some team members outside of Nova Scotia. We have a couple of people in Boston. And I think, as we're starting to recruit and more people and grow the team, it's going to be really interesting in a new sort of paradigm for me in terms of how I recruit people and how I build a company. I'm definitely, spent a lot of time with mostly people in the office, or at least a lot of the core people in the office. So I think that'll be a bit of a challenge. Going about raising our first round of capital without it being a roadshow is kind of interesting. Sure. So yeah, I look forward to that too. But the other thing I think this day and age, there's just so many more startups than there ever were before. Right. And there's more starting all the time. So generally, if you have a really good idea, I think that there's a whole lot of other people that also have that really good idea as well. So the competitive landscapes develop and evolve much more quickly than they used to. So that's, another interesting challenge that we'll be dealing with over the next couple of months and years.
Nice. So you got a little bit of pressure to innovate a little quicker. Yeah, that's nice.
You got it.
Nice. Darren, who or what have been 3 resources? It could be books and or people who mentors or influencers or people you follow who you say have been instrumental to your success over the last few years.
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of different. I've had a lot of mentors over the years that have been great. Doing the Techstars Boston program and getting introduced to a ton of people there has been really helpful. read quite a few books. I think for me, some of the books that I've kind of gone back to and looked at again are sort of modeled into some of the, corporate culture and leadership in the business. One is The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni.
Okay.
That was a book that I read it, really liked it, implemented some things from it, went back, sort of leveraged it again. Another one in that same context was Developing the Leader Within You by John C. Maxwell. Those are two serious, really good books to think about when you're sort of, building your own leadership skills and then trying to help other people in your organization that lead departments build their skills as you're growing. And I think reading those books has also sort of opened my mind to the concept of having a coach. And then I watched a couple of documentaries where they're talking about sports documentaries. They're talking about the value of the coach, and I'm paralleling this to how a coach could be super effective as an entrepreneur, and start really thinking about myself as getting up in the morning to perform every day in the same way an athlete would do that. And so start thinking about it. Got me thinking more about taking care of yourself to be able to perform. You can't imagine an NBA basketball player is not going to go out and drink all night and then get up in the morning and go have the maybe there's a few out there that can do that, but I'd say for the most part, you get that good night's sleep, you stretch, you look after yourself, right? You eat well, you do all these things, right? So, really trying to create discipline in what I do. And now I'm bringing in a coach. I'm about to work with my first coach in the new year. So pretty stoked about taking that on. And, I think being the more as you build your team more, your role, it changes substantially, right? You hear lots of stories about CEOs sort of stepping down from the CEO role at a certain point in the growth trajectory because they need a professional CEO. And for me, I'm really engaged in the challenge, and I'm looking forward to sort of the transitioning and having my role evolve in that regard as much as it can. When you're just a couple of co-founders and a couple of employees, you're kind of doing everything, right? You're you're cleaning the toilets, you're mopping the floor, you're ordering paper, you're selling, you're doing product stuff, you're doing quality of service, you're doing customer support. You're really and so the skill set there is very different. When you have a couple of hundred employees, it's a very different scenario, right? So I think those are great books that have been really helpful to me and help me think about sort of that continual sort of personal and professional growth as a leader.
Nice. I haven't read, but I'm a big fan of John Maxwell, but we'll add those links to the show notes.
Cool.
I actually think that's one of the most underrated, skill sets or I think skill sets, right? And habits that you develop, people of, looking internally to become better as CEOs and leaders versus, people looking externally. I think, in developing those habits of taking care of your mind and your mindset and your body. And then, that's kind of the foundation that you can build upon to get better and better, right?
And I think it gives you the ability to build a company that people like to work at more. So when you're just constantly squeezing everybody and pushing everybody all the time, and there's there's no consideration for their well-being, and it's not necessarily malicious. I've been there before in my early days of Marcato. You're treating yourself that way, so you don't really feel like you're being an idiot to these people. You're just you're under the gun, you're under this pressure, and you just feel like the only way to get through it is to just harder. Humans can only work so hard for so long. Right. And I think if you can actually sort of break down some of the barriers, be a great leader, get people to start thinking and learning about themselves and getting better, and then think about okay, well, you're coming to work, you're going to work for 10 hours today. But really getting people to start being better at doing the right things and using their time better and coming in more prepared and being more effective and respecting their time, respect their time off, give them vacation time, let them have, there's more to life than work. And also like I know we've all been in this position where we're like sitting there late at night trying to do something. You're writing an email that's taking you like 30 minutes. If you just woke up, like went and slept for 8 hours and got up, had a cup of coffee and a nice breakfast and attacked it in the morning, you'd write that same email in like 5 minutes. So like, why are you still there?
Yeah, that's true.
So I think it does. Like, I think it helps build a culture that people want to be in. People want to be effective. People want to do really good work and they want to be part of a winning team, but they also, they want that balance and they want to feel like their job isn't taking over their entire existence, right? So, which can happen in startups.
Exactly. Yeah, that's sometimes part of the game. So, obviously had some good success, had an exit. Today, what would you say success means to you, whether it's personally, financially, business-wise? Yeah,
I think like there's definitely a situation of diminishing returns with money. If you're going to be a lot happier if you're making $100,000 than if you're making $50,000 a year. I think like from 100 to 200, it's not going to be that much of an improvement. From like 200 to 2 million. It just gets to a point where like, how much money do you need to have a really good life, right? So, I think for me, I'm motivated by having enough money to retire and live well and have some toys and have some freedom there. But honestly, one of the things that sort of pushes me to build a big company and to be able to have a really big exit at the end is I think, post this startup, I would love to be able to contribute more to my region and to be able to help more technology startup founders grow. And so, I really look at having a big exit as a big event for not just myself, but for the community, and for, it would give me the ability to invest in other startups, and also to set an example. We just recently had a company, Verifin, out of Newfoundland. Now, Newfoundland is like, no offense to any Newfoundland listeners here, but Cape Breton Island, Nova Scotia is pretty far off the map, but Newfoundland is like, you have to get on a ferry from Cape Breton and go about 6 hours out to sea to get to Newfoundland. I mean, yes, you can fly there, obviously, but this company, it was a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, right? So I think we always sort of have this belief that you need to be in Silicon Valley, or you need to be in New York, or you need to be in a big city. So I think it's great seeing a success like the Verifin. I'd love to have another big success like that come out of Cape Breton here. I think it just sort of sets the stage, and it shows people that you can do anything you want pretty much from anywhere nowadays. So that's really something that motivating me to build a big company for sure.
Very cool. Yeah, I think there's another company I know, Proposify. I think they're from the east coast of Canada as well. Yeah. So that's another one.
Kyle Racky. Yeah.
Kyle Racky, exactly. Yeah, he's a pretty good entrepreneur.
Yeah. Great company.
Cool. Thanks, Darren, for jumping on SaaS District. How can our audience get in touch with you or learn more about what you're working on?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me at darren@securacy.com. I'm available on email. It comes to my inbox. I might not get back to you right away, but I definitely will respond within a couple of days. So that's the best way to hit me. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for jumping on, Darren. Appreciate it. Awesome. Thank you. Cheers. Take care. Thank you all for watching this episode and joining SaaS District today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future episodes where we interview top leaders in the SaaS industry. If you're a SaaS company looking to grow and unlock the true value of your business, get in touch with us at Horizon Capital, and myself or one of our consultants will provide a free assessment to help you get there and hit your goals. If you have any feedback or suggestions for this podcast, please comment down below and help us improve our content for you all. Thanks again, and see you on the next one.